Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I'm the manager of visitor experience at the museum. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome back to those of you who have joined us before for previous programs in this series. This virtual series features programs on Pennsylvania transit history topics, stories of our collection that you can experience from home, usually on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And we are going to continue these as long as I have presenters. So if you have a show that fits the museum mission, that would be anything about Pennsylvania, the trolley era, stories about our collection, or where our streetcars come from, please reach out, let me know. And if you have a program that doesn't quite fit those guidelines, feel free to reach out as well, because occasionally we do branch out somewhere else. Okay. Sorry, I'm moving my notes around here. We do have a full list of upcoming programs at our website, patrolley.org, which I'll share in the chat box in just a couple minutes here. We only have one more scheduled through March right now. Dave Warner will be presenting. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So please reach out if you have a program. And I want to extend a very special thank you to those of you who donated while you were registering for tonight's program. We're really lucky to have supporters like you guys to help us keep these programs going. Okay, brief introduction to the museum. We were established in 1954 as the Arden Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club, and we opened to visitors a few years later in 1963. The museum is actually located along the route of the former interurban between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA, and we've got over 50 trolleys and electric railway cars here now. Couple dozen of those operate. So last year we had over 48,000 visitors take our 4-mile scenic ride. And I kind of slowed down when I said over 50 trolleys and electric railway cars there. And that is because today we actually had a new acquisition. So the car on the left there is car 83, one of the 80 series of Red Arrow cars, and that was delivered just this morning. So breaking news, we just released some information on our website and on our Facebook, so you can go see some more photos there, and you can click on the PA Trolley link when I share it in the chat in just a few minutes. So that is the latest. It's very exciting. It's a sister car to car 78, pictured on the right there. It's in its Gulf oil scheme still, so that's going to be stored pending restoration. But it came from the Middletown and Hummelstown Railroad, and we thank them for their assistance getting the car to us today. Okay, coming up, we also have our monthly toddler program, Trolley Tots, which has been sold out for both of the first 2 months so far this year. Free Kid February has 2 days of February left, this Thursday and Friday. We have, let's see, last February in 2024, we had about 500 visitors. And this year so far, we've had about 2,200 visitors in February. So don't miss out. It's your chance to come out, bring the kids for free. This is a little bit outdated. We had Teddy Bear Trolley in February, but we do have the open house for potential volunteers coming up March 8th. So if you're local and you're interested in getting involved and you're not really sure how and you want to learn more, stop by the open house March 8th. Vintage Communications Weekend is coming up. We're expecting typewriters, printing presses, radios, telephones, cameras, all sorts of fun things. It's like we become a little technology museum for the weekend, which is kind of fun. And then Bunny Trolley tickets are on sale for members now. And starting on Friday, they are on sale to the public as well. One last announcement from our friends at the East Penn Traction Club. They are having their meet on May 15th through 17th, and they're doing some layout tours on May 18th. So check them out at eastpenn.org/meet. They have their annual meet, I believe, in odd years. Yes, this is an odd year. And then we have the West Penn Trolley meet on even years. So that'll be next in 2026. So check that out if you're interested. Okay, right now, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Bob Wright. Bob Wright is a lifelong resident of Philadelphia and has been riding transit from nearly day one and continues to do so 60-some years later. As a result of being a part of a family that never owned a car, something not all that uncommon in South Philadelphia when he grew up, he got to ride transit quite a bit and consequently became a fan of the Philadelphia Transportation Company at a very young age. This continued once PTC was purchased by SEPTA. His mother was somewhat proud that he had an excellent knowledge of the SEPTA system and was often asked by friends and relatives how to get somewhere on transit. Bob grew up around the corner from the Route 29 Trackless Trolley and a few blocks from the Route 50 Trolley and a half block from the Route 5 bus. The last two no longer exist. His interest in transit led him to pursue a degree in civil engineering from the University of Pennsylvania, and he went into transportation engineering, where he continues to serve as a consultant for both highway and transit projects, with 45 years of experience in the profession. He's written several articles for publications on Philadelphia transit over the years, and railroads and transit remain a hobby as he continues to photograph and read about transit history. He became a member of the museum this year, although I believe we need to update the bio because I think it was last year now. So thank you, Bob. In his free time, in addition to his transit interests, Bob enjoys gardening, tinkering around the house, walking, bowling, an occasional attempt at golf, and following the Phillies, Eagles, and Flyers. He remains a fan of the Big Five college basketball, which he has closely followed since he was a child. He's also an active member of several engineering and professional organizations. Okay, at this time, I would like to ask everybody to turn off their videos. And you may notice that you're muted. At the end of the program, we'll have a question and answer session with Bob, but the chat box will be open throughout. So please feel free to type any questions, comments during the show, and we'll get to read through those at the end. And just to note, this program is being recorded and will be shared on our YouTube sometime soon. Okay, at this time, we'll turn off our videos and I will turn it over to you, Bob. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. Let's get shared here. If we can see the screen there, everyone, then we're good to go.
Oh, actually, we're seeing your presenter mode.
Okay.
So you may want to...
I got to reshare. Okay, let me stop that.
Reshare.
Right. Share. That should do it. Okay, better.
There we go.
All right. Actually, you didn't start at screen slide one, but we'll get started. Thanks for that nice intro, Kristen. I never realize how busy I am until somebody reads my bio, and I wonder where I have all the time to do this stuff that somebody said I do. But it's always interesting to hear it. I just did something here. What did I do? Okay. Let me correct that. Can I get back to all right, full screen.
If you need to reshare again, that might... Oh, now it's again.
Yeah, let me reshare. Sorry.
All right.
All right.
It always works like 30 seconds before I let everybody in.
Yeah. Okay, this is better. I'm not going to touch anything else. Okay.
Okay.
Stop that. All right, so we'll get going again. This is, as Kristen mentioned, this is a century plus of trackless trolleys, the Philadelphia trackless system. It's been around for 101 years of service as of last October. And I will credit a few people here. NYC Subway Org, Dave Pearman has allowed me to use photos. Mike Schlage and Philly Trolley Org also shared photos of his and others, which is good because in this segment, as Kristen mentioned, we did part two before, so we did it backwards. And I wasn't around for much of part one, so I wasn't taking photos for sure. When part one ends, I was about 10 years old or 11 years old, so that gives you an idea of where we are in time. So I wasn't, although I was riding, I wasn't photographing or anything at the time. But we'll get into that. Again, 101 years of trackless service, not continuous. There was a time when the tracklesses were not running back in the early 2000s. We touched on that on part two. The first trackless was Route 80, Oregon Avenue. That began October 14th, 1923, just before PRT, Philadelphia Rapid Transit Company, which is the token on the right there, PRT token. PRT introduced bus routes in 1925, so this actually predated the bus system. And just this past weekend, we had, way back when PRT started buses, the trolley routes were numbered, the bus routes were lettered, And 6 of the last 7 lettered routes were changed to numbers this past Sunday. So we still have 1 letter. Now we have lettered trolleys and subways and things like that. So just for reference, what's new is old, what's old is new kind of thing. Again, this is a 2-part presentation. We did part 2. I guess that was back in November, December timeframe. That's on YouTube now. This is part 1. We go backwards. And part 1 takes us from the beginning through when SEPTA took over PTC. And there's one of the coaches that's on 80. We'll get more into that in a minute. So the system, just to give you an overview, the system was never a very big one. All times, PRT, PTC, SEPTA operated 7 routes. The first was 80, the second was 61, as we'll see as we go through. So PRT actually started 1 route, operated 1 route. When 61 came along, it was PTC. And the rest of the system happened after World War II, all under PTC. The maximum number of routes that was operating was 6, and 5 were there at SEPTA's takeover. And the map to the right there shows where they were, and you can see the cities highlighted in white there. It's a pretty expansive city. As I like to tell people, it's like a big Y. You can see northeast and northwest kind of veer off into the Y, and you've got the stem down through the center. So the lines were kind of all over the place. They weren't really concentrated in any one part of the city. Then that's pretty much the way the system developed. If we look at PRT in 1923, just taking a glance, this is just one part of the track system. Again, it was all trolleys back in 23. This is the center part of town. It wasn't called Center City back then. That came along later. It was called usually Center of City or downtown or uptown, depending on where you were. You can see tracks all over the place. There was no Broad Street subway, so a lot of north-south routes, in the absence of the subway, carry the load. Again, lots of trolley routes, about 80 of them total. The Market Frankfurt L came down Market Street, went out Front Street. That was opened in 1922. The Market Street part was opened in 1907. There was a branch down to the ferries. So that was the one rapid transit line in the city. You had the subway surface, what we call the trolley subway on Market Street. 6 routes ran in that. And there were about 2,700 streetcars. And again, over 1,800 of them were single-ended. So you get an idea, a lot of routes had operated on one-way streets or had loops. So they were able to turn. And the L had 315 cars. The Broad Street subway wouldn't come along for another 5 years. And then when that happened, this map dramatically changed on the north-south axis. A lot of streetcar routes went by the wayside, and more feeder routes operated to the subway. Went too far. So where it all started again with Route 80 that began in October 23 when it crossed town in South Philadelphia on Oregon Avenue. There was no service on Oregon Avenue prior to that, and that connected a port and industrial area on the east side next to Delaware Avenue with some residential areas on the west side. The reason that no car lines had operated here was there were a lot of railroad crossings on the east end. There was a lot of railroad and railroad yards down there. And there were some railroad tracks in Oregon Avenue that gradually disappeared. So it was not a place where you'd want to have a trolley running across all these great crossings and next to live railroad tracks. There were a lot of north-south car lines in the area. They didn't go all the way to Oregon Avenue because development didn't happen down there, especially east of Broad Street. So there wasn't a whole lot of transfer possibilities. So the 80 kind of ran on its own, but it did serve an area, as we'll see, that wasn't served by anything else. And the 80 started operating out at the then new Southern Depot. Southern was the third car house that was built by the Mitten management of PRT. Luzerne was the first, Cal Hill was the second, and pretty much identical among the 3. Luzerne is no longer operated by SEPTA, but Southern and Cal Hill are. They're basically bus depots at this point. Get an idea, again, looking at that track map at the southern end, you can see where a lot of those north-south routes stopped short of Oregon Avenue. Again, that's where development ended, especially east of Broad Street. There was no development that would come later. West of Broad Street, there was a little more. But you can see the 80 kind of just went across town, went to the port area, the industrial area, where no other transit was at the time. And from what I've been told, PRT was talking about buses serving this, but the buses came later. There was a bus route on Delaware Avenue, which operated much later. This was the 80 basically cross town tying into the system at 23rd and Passyunk. where you could get the 81 transferred to that. You did hit the 17 and 32, which came out of Center City, downtown, and then went across town. About 3 miles one-way length, and the fleet was 11 coaches. Brill built them all, apparently, and again, a lot of this history is oral and passed down from what I've gotten, and again, I wasn't there to see it or experience it myself. 10 of them were built by Brill. One was built by Brill Commercial, although there are reports there were other companies involved in this. These are very rudimentary coaches, as we'll see in the pictures. Some people describe these as sort of Bernie cars on wheels. They kind of look like that. And if you can look at the upper left, you can see Coach 60. I think that's going across Broad Street in a pose shot. And you can see for 60, it was very high riding. There's actually a drop step there, like streetcars had, to let people get up. You can see the other coaches 59 below. The wheel wells actually are in the body, so the wheels were lower. You didn't need the drop step to get on. But you can see pretty crude and rudimentary coaches for this line. Upper right picture shows Oregon Avenue as it started to be developed with residential and very wide street in South Philadelphia. South Philadelphia is loaded with narrow streets. This was very wide. And below that, again, you can see Oregon Avenue down on the east side where it crossed railroads. And it's actually foggy down there looking toward the river. It must have been a foggy day on the river. But you can see the coaches coming up, and there's actually railroad tracks off to the right of that picture that disappeared as time went on. Again, more shots of the coaches here. Interestingly, on the upper right, you can see some of the competition on the road was horse-drawn wagons. There's a horse kind of poking out on the left side of the coach. And the loop at Delaware Avenue was just, again, using the width of Oregon Avenue on one big turn to get from one side to the other. That warehouse that you see is a railroad warehouse that's still there. Those things they don't come down because they're hard to tear down. But that's still there. It's been repurposed, I think, for storage now. It was a cold storage at one time. And you can see the coaches just had a front destination sign, very rudimentary, like the nearside cars did, but not even a number box, just the number plate that was hung on the dashboard for the 80. Those coaches lasted about 13 years. Again, I'm not sure, again, if they were built to last or anything. But the other coaches that came along to replace those, there were 8 that were built by Brill, as usual. Brill was in Philadelphia. Apparently, this one in the lower left was a demonstrator that was tried out and didn't quite make the cut there, I guess, had the extreme rear door and a front door. The coaches that took over the T30s actually had a center door. And again, you wonder, something this small needed a center door, but it had it. And there's down in the lower right, there's probably a rare color view of that. And the person that sent me this photo said that orange is probably similar to what was used on the 5200 double enders that were painted orange. That maroon is the belt rail that was used on the PCCs later on. So an odd color scheme. Apparently some of these got painted later on in the PTC green and cream when PTC came along. And again, this wasn't the first operation of tracklesses anywhere. It worked some out in the Midwest, small systems. There was a fairly decent sized system in Staten Island for a number of years. Detroit had another operation. None of those lasted very long. Philadelphia's did, and again for 101 years, and still going. And again, more shots of the 80. You can see, again, this is at the Delaware Avenue end. You can see the seaport down there. Ocean-going ships came in. A lot of people got to work taking the 80 down there, getting to the piers. And there were some other industries. If you've ever heard of Publicker, big distillery, they were massive down here in this part of town. So, again, places for people to get employed. Here's a nice little shot of Coach 75 in the lower left. Again, that's 119th Street going into toward the Southern Depot. So interesting little shot. And more of the same, the coaches as they looked. Again, not sure why there's a center door, but there's a center door. And there's a publicity shot there. I think that's Ohio Brass with some of the crossings as the trolley line started to get extended down and cross the trackless line. This coach, apparently one of the old girls hung on, just sat in Southern Depot for years. This is believed to be 61, as I've been told. Again, it's not 60, we know, because it's a lower riding coach. But just sat there. I don't know whether somebody thought they'd preserve it or use it or whatever, but eventually it was scrapped. So PRT went away. PRT was in bankruptcy for many years after the Depression. It got reorganized as PTC at the beginning of 1940. And again, a lot of this history isn't written or anything, but from what I've been told, there was a plan to start looking at trackless trolley conversions on a lot of routes. And again, part of this was the fleet was getting older, the track conditions weren't so great. And PRT and PTC were not power companies, so there was no need to use excess power or anything. But it was just a way, again, to use what was there as far as overhead and everything. And the other big advantage in trackless in Pennsylvania was that they didn't need to be registered as vehicles. They didn't need license plates because they were considered captive vehicles. They couldn't go anywhere but under the wire. So I guess if you replaced it with buses, you'd have to register and pay for registration for all the buses, but the tracklesses you did not. So that might have been a factor. 61 is an interesting line. It still operates today pretty much the same way. It was the first conversion of any streetcar line to trackless in Philadelphia. Starts out downtown, goes up Ridge Avenue, which is a diagonal street across North Philadelphia, ends up in the northwest part of Philadelphia, East Falls, Wissahick, and Manayunk neighborhoods. And if you're familiar with Main Street in Manayunk, which is now a very trendy area, this 61 runs right along Main Street. Back then, it was a little less trendy, a little more industrial, so it was a generator. Again, this was a streetcar line that ran double enders. The first 5200s that were purchased by PTC, or PRT, one of which is preserved at the museum. A big chunk of those ran on 61. That ran until 1931. A Y was provided at the northern end, which was unusual. Philadelphia had very few Ys, but that was installed, and the near side cars were able to take over once the Y was placed. So again, you had the capability of using single-ended cars. The reasons for this were, again, combination of track conditions, utility work that was needed along the route, and the cars not getting any older. If you think about the near sides in particular, when PTC took over, they were almost all 30 years old, and most of them were still in service. So again, that there was a reason to look at this and start to phase out equipment that just made sense. This would be, as it turns out, the first and only trackless route that would come downtown into Center City. But again, as it ran up and down the corridor to cross 36 or 33 intersecting car lines, so a lot of transfer capabilities. Nearly 7 miles in length one way, so better than double the 80. And again, it started right at 8th and Market Street, the downtown hub of all the department stores, all of which are now gone, unfortunately. So a big shopping area, a big attraction to make good use of by riders. There were a lot of residential areas in North Philadelphia and in Manayunk. Again, some on the outer end. There were some industrial areas. Manayunk was full of mills because it's right along the Schuylkill River, and the mills grew up there. That was their power. So there was a peak hour in both directions. There were people headed out to work from North Philadelphia. There were people headed into downtown to go to work or shop. So route was always busy. 50 Brill T40s were purchased to serve the line. And that was a little surprising because, again, 40 passenger vehicles on a line that used big, huge near side and double end cars. But apparently this was one of those ideas at the time when Detroit started it early on to run more vehicles on shorter smaller vehicles, more vehicles, shorter headways, better service. And that didn't last too long because it costed a lot of money. But it did last a long time with 61. Allegheny Depot was the home base of 61. That's the start there, 26th and Allegheny. There was a short stretch of non-revenue wire to get back and forth to the depot. Some of the coaches did run short turns to Allegheny. Some of them, there was a loop at 35th Street. Some of them ran to the depot itself. So that did provide capability to turn back cars or buses or trackless. Again, PTC took over PRT at the beginning of 1940. 61 began service on October 5th, 1941. Originally, it went to 8th and Locust in town. It was cut back to 8th and Walnut with some street direction changes. Locust was one-way westbound at the time. It was changed to one-way eastbound. So that facilitated the move of 61 to Walnut Street, which was a westbound street. The other idea with 61 was a lot of the extreme northern and East Falls and Manioc competed with the Reading Railroad, the Reading Norristown line, which came from Norristown. It was actually the main line from Reading, came down through almost parallel the corridor for a good distance. It was a way to get people downtown. It was a lot faster. It was a little more expensive, but the people wanted to get into town. They would usually use the Reading Railroad. So 61 was not a big carrier to people coming downtown from the northern areas necessarily. So there was some competition, and it's interesting, ironic today. That's the line I use, the Norristown line. If any of you are using SEPTA Regional Rail today, you knew there were major delays for some reason. I was sweating it out a little bit trying to get back to do this, but that worked out. And again, this gives you an idea. On the right, you can see two near sides passing. Again, very narrow street here, that Ridge Avenue and Main Street that the line used. You can see they're almost just about passing. No room to stand between those cars there. The old near sides. In the upper left, that was probably a Sunday trip that used an 8000. And you can see the new coach is probably a publicity shot taken on Allegheny Avenue down in the lower left. And more of the same. There's another publicity shot just before the coaches went into service. Some more publicity there. One on the right is a picture down on 9th Street where that 61 shared the tracks of 47 and the overhead. And you can see, if you're a Philadelphia person, you can see Leary's just off to the left there. Leary's was an old bookstore. Gimbel's occupied the whole block, one of the big department stores in town, and Leary's had this little sliver off on a side street. It was a very good bookstore while it lasted, but most people knew, if you mentioned Leary's, they knew exactly where that was. Again, more shots of the line operating. The lower right picture is probably a publicity trip before the line got going. In true Philadelphia fashion, it's got the wrong sign up. It's heading northbound, but it's got the southbound destination. So that happened even back then. And you can see there's a PRT or PTC double-decker at the curb right by Gimbel's there. I don't know what that's doing there, but it's there. For those of you that I throw in gratuitous bus shots every so often, so that's one of them if you're keeping score. The 50 coaches proved that probably wasn't enough. There was a lot of demand for service, especially with the improvement of the newer vehicles. So PTC went back, was able to get 10 more in early 1942 to enhance the service, add capacity, and was trying to get more, but of course the wartime restrictions kicked in, so there were no more coming after this order, at least for the time being. Down in the lower left is a shot inside Allegheny Depot where the coaches were housed, and the picture on the lower right is, again, you can see that's the Allegheny Yard. There's a coach in the yard there, and coach 123 is out on Allegheny Avenue in a pose shot, I'm guessing. PTC did manage to pick up a couple of coaches, a handful, I guess, during the war. They were trying to get more. They didn't get Brills, though. They got Pullmans. They got 6 coaches, came and did what they did. Most of these ended up on 61, although 1 or 2 did get down to the 80. Interestingly enough, at the west end of 80 were a couple of defense related activities, Defense Supply Center, which was there for a number of years, called the Quartermaster, and some other things. So a couple of these got down on 80 for that service. But these were Pullmans, and Philadelphia is a Brill town. There's a shot at the upper right shot is in service on the 80. The pose shot in the lower left is probably on Allegheny Avenue. But these being not Brills, they didn't have much frequent service once the war ended. They apparently went off to storage and were out of service for many years, and probably disposed of sometime in the 50s. But again, what came in handy for when they were needed. Again, a couple shots of the 61. This one is probably downtown. I'm guessing on 9th Street, the one on the right. The one on the left is at Wissahickon Loop, which is still there today. It's being greatly expanded. If you're familiar with Philadelphia, it's going to become a big transit center. And if you poke your eye right over there, up just all above the greenery, that's the Reading Railroad's bridge across the Wissahickon, which carries the Norristown line. That's still there and still functioning. And just to clarify, the Wissahickon Loop actually ran clockwise back then. Now it runs counterclockwise, and it's just bus. But again, a couple of shots here of 61 coaches in service. The one in the upper right is the 33rd and Dauphin Loop. That's been restored. It's the building there where a couple car lines came in, and you would come here to catch the Fairmount Park Trolley, which you may be familiar with. That had a terminal on the other side of 33rd Street, off to the left of this shot. And again, if you wanted to go into the park or Woodside Park, which was an amusement park, you would take the 839 or 7 here, jump off, go across the street, and pay another fare to ride the park trolley. You can see that there's a 61 coach on Ridge Avenue just outside of this, just poking into the picture. So put that there. And 8 and 39 ran near sides. This was probably toward the end of their life when the near sides were retired. They didn't last very long after the near sides went, but again, this was probably within 6 months or so that it kept operating with 8,000 cars. As the war ended, you can see on the left side, parts of Ridge Avenue were improved and greatly widened. So you had this narrow street that was widened in a number of places. The coaches still used that. I guess the wire was moved toward the curb. And, they followed the curb line. The upper right, the Ridge Depot, which was a long-time storage depot, was reopened and became the new home for the 61. The 61 moved out of Allegheny after the war, and again, the coaches moved into Ridge Depot, and they called that home. That was on Ridge Avenue, just south of that 33rd Dauphin Loop that we saw in the last picture. And the lower right there is 61 again, wrong sign. It's got the Matty Young sign up coming down 8th Street. At Chestnut Street has the brick pavement there. You can see there's a subway entrance there just off to the left of the coach. That's goes down to the Patco speed line and the Broad Street spur of SEPTA. The plans apparently that were formulating before the war to do more conversions again got put on hold because of the war. And when the war stopped, things started to happen again. And there was an ability to buy coaches, so an order was placed with Brill again, not Pullman. Brill became the supplier. And the Route 29 was the first post-war conversion. And we talked about this in part 2, just to give some brief background. Again, it's the same thing we're going to talk about here. This ran across town, Morris and Tasker Street. This was a streetcar line that ran near side cars, one man. Again, track conditions, utility work on old cars sort of prompted the conversion. The conversion took the original route, Water Street to 28th Street, and then a new off-street loop was built about 6 months later and opened up service west of that to 33rd and Dickinson, which was the ultimate endpoints of the route. There was a new order for Brill coaches again. 65 of them came. The first 40 went down to Southern Depot and were shared with Route 80. And at about that time, the T30s were retired. 29 is a big Broad Street subway feeder. The Broad Street subway comes in roughly at the midpoint of the line and also crosses a lot of north-south car lines. So there's a lot of transfer capabilities. And here's some shots of 29, when it ran the near side cars. In the upper right, 3 lines were actually taken out of the fleet, or took near sides out of the fleet back in the 20s, when a lot of the other near sides were converted to add the center door, which they didn't have originally. A number of cars were segregated off and became one-man operated. There were some changes in the door operation or whatever, but Ken kept that single point of entry and exit at the front door. 29, 63, and 64 out of Southern Depot operated these one-man near sides for a while. And it was interesting because the 29, it actually was one of the first routes to get the 8,000 cars in 1923. And those cars had both front and center doors as built. And that experiment didn't work so well. So again, the operation was better with one-man service, and that it took these cars on. But eventually, the two-door cars came along and took over the operation before the Trackless started operating. There's the post shot down in the lower left. These had a pretty elaborate paint scheme, a silver roof, the black trim, and everything. And this was a post shot that was taken on Route 80 on 21st Street near Girard Square. A very, very nice part of town, nice houses, and very, very bucolic area there. And the other shot of the Trackless in the lower right is at the 33rd Street loop. And again, some of the 200s were shared with 80. They got rid of the smaller coaches. They brought these in. Some shots on the 80. The one on the upper left is actually cheated a little bit. That's a fan trip for much later, but it is technically using the Route 80, which is now pulling for 29 and 79. But you can see again, these coaches fit in well on Oregon Avenue, and took over from the smaller coaches. A couple shots in the Southern Depot area, at least the first three are. Again, you can see 204 there in the upper right, sharing some of the maintenance facilities with one of the 8,000 cars that hung on 17. And the lower left, that was a big car yard at the time. There were a couple lanes for Trackless that were tossed in there. And now that's that became the Trackless facility later on when the cars left. And 265, the last coach of the order, is there. That's probably a post shot at the Brill plant. The next addition to the system was actually not really a route, but an extension, which took 61 about another quarter mile from the intersection of Main and Leverington, where it did turn around. It became a very busy intersection. It was hard to turn the coaches around there. So this line was extended up on a little part of the Manioc area called Venice Island, which sounds a lot nicer than it is, although right now it's becoming very trendy. But back then, again, it was a lot of industry. A big paper plant was there and a couple other places. A new turnaround was put at the end of Flat Rock Road on Venice Island, and just near Fountain Street, and the 61s went there. Again, there was a commercial industrial area that took the turnaround out of the busy intersection. And there was another branch. If you turned the east on Leverington, there's a street called Umbria Street. There was a thought to run the Trackless up there. That never happened. But when the 61 became bus, that became a branch that was operated. And you can see 249 is sitting in the what you call the container loop, which is right by the Connolly container plant, right there. Fountain Street's in the background, and those wires are back both the old Pensy line that went up to Norristown and the Reading that still operates in Norristown. So again, the program continued. The 75 became the next conversion in 1948. This was again up crossing upper North Philadelphia, lower Northeast, extending down Margaret Orthodox Street into Bridesburg and back over Arrett Street, crossing both the L and the subway. So this fed both the L and the subway on its busy route. This was a line that was operated with 8,000 series cars. But again, the track conditions, utility work, and old cars sort of did it in. It was changed west of 5th Street. It went straight through on Wyoming. The 75 car went down 5th Street and over Erie Avenue to get to the subway. So this served a new service area that hadn't been had any transit service before, and got us over to Wayne Junction right there, the old Reading lines there. So there were a lot of different connections that 75 provided. That began again April 48. Before this was changed, Margaret and Orthodox Street were eastbound, Arrett was westbound. That changed to the opposite. So the Trackless started to use the streets in those directions. The last 25 of the Brills went to 75, and that introduced Trackless to the Frankfort Depot where they were based. So again, taking some pictures and shots of that. You can see in the lower right was the 75 when its old alignment, the trackless alignment took it on some streets. It had some private right of way before that on Ramona Avenue that got changed out for some street operation on Castor and Wyoming Avenues. The old turnaround in the upper left, there's a 15 near side coming down Orthodox. The 75's at its layover point at Richmond and Orthodox there. And you can see there's a passing siding, if you want to call it that. If a trackless is waiting, one could pass it. The tracks are kind of in an odd place in the street. Again, this was a westbound street at one time. It got moved to eastbound. So tracks are not quite where they should be, but they remain there. And again, in the lower left, again, up at Rising Sun in Wyoming, you can see there's a 51 of the old KC cars making a turn, and the 75 coach waiting for the light at the stop back there. Jump ahead a little bit again. When newer coaches started to come along, they started to populate 75. So you see some of them here. We'll talk a little more about this as we get into the 300s, but this shows again that the upper left shot was coming straight through, going to Richmond Street, the old routing, and crossing under the Frankfurt L there, where it made a connection. And a couple more shots. Upper right is actually at the Howard Street Terminal. When the 75 started, again, it came straight through, so it took the left side. If you're familiar with that, there's a part where Howard Street comes right along, just to the south of this, or to the left of or to the right of the coach, actually. And 75 used that straight through, loaded at a loading island there. 59 came along later, and because of some operational difficulties, a second wire was added back after 75 was cut back. So the 75 had a point of layover. So the 75 started to use that northern driveway through the Arrett terminal there. And down on the bottom right there is 75 going around a circle at Castor in Wyoming. The streetcar did not go around there. Again, that went up Adams and over Ramona, took a little different route. But again, this went around, and there was a complete loop of wire here, so they could turn in each direction. You could have cutbacks either way around the circle. It wasn't used that often, but it was there in case it was needed. The 59 was the next one. Again, this was a car line that was built by the city that opened when the Frankfurt L opened back in 1922. Went up into the northeast part of Philadelphia. Again, northeast was very sparsely populated at the time. So 59 went there. Development happened very strongly after World War II. So a couple of changes had to be made. One was, again, the 59 would become a trackless. When it was a streetcar, it ran the 5200 series, as you can see in the picture below. Again, the ones preserved at the Trolley Museum. And the new development, track conditions, and roadway construction kind of forced this to happen. But the trackless didn't follow the whole 59 route way up into Bustleton. It cut short at what was known as Bell's Corner, which is where Castor and Bustleton Avenues meet. An off-street loop was provided there, and a bus was provided to take the rest of the way. At the time, it was a shuttle. Later on, it was extended to come into Frankfurt Terminal on its own by Bustleton Avenue. So that would come later. And the service began in 1950, and the city actually purchased the fleet of Marmon Harringtons, odd numbers. And again, apparently that was to work around the other coaches that were on the property at the time. But you had these 28 coaches that were purchased, again, not Brills for a change, again, Marmon Harringtons. And the 59 shared Frankfurt Depot with 75. So some shots of 59. Again, in the lower left, you can see one of the Mormons has delivered letter for the city of Philadelphia. Apparently that was removed at one point, and they became PTC. I'm not sure that was legal. I've heard different stories about that, but they were never owned by PTC. They were leased. And above that is, again, a shot at the 59 at the Howard Street area, loading island. Again, that's where Howard Street comes through. Just to the right of that, upper right, you can see where, again, that's a two barrel loading area. Howard Street's on the right. The one on the left where the 75 is waiting is private SEPTA owned, and that was added later. And the shot, again, Frankfurt Terminal, Frankfurt Depot on the lower right. Put this in there. Somebody took a shot from the L, but you can see the trackless is poking out just as the side of the barn. that area where all the cars are stored just to its right would later become the whole trackless short once the trolleys disappeared. So that's that. And again, you can see a couple cars. There's actually PCCs on the line now. The Route 5 started running PCCs when they arrived in 1948. More shots of 59. Again, the left side is at Castor and Cotman, again, the focal point in Northeast Philadelphia, not far from the plane crash that happened a few weeks ago. And the Litt Brothers, again, a big department store name in Philadelphia at one time. And also Philadelphia Water Ice and Soft Pretzels, that little Metro vans poking in from the side there. So we'll give a shout out to that. At the lower right picture is obviously a shot of the 59 having some issues. And you can see there's a 59 actually numbered on the back of that. And there was a reason for that. I'm not sure when that went away, but the reason was when you look at the upper right where 59 is, that was shared by 59 and 75 for a while. The 59s laid over back on Oxford Avenue before they came in here, and 75s came straight through. And if you were coming down the L stairs there to get a coach and you saw one sitting there, that would give you an idea that was a 59. Again, back at the time, PTC was very regimented about what vehicles were assigned to what route. And if you look at assignments, certain types of buses were assigned to bus routes, certain types of streetcars went to trolley routes. And 59 and 75, yeah, they didn't share the fleet. The 59s were the Marmons and the 75s were the Brills. But as this happened later, again, this was just a reminder for those that couldn't tell the difference that don't run for that. If you're trying to get a 75, no need to run. That's a 59. So I guess if you didn't see a number, then you would assume it's a 75. But just one of those little nuances that were there. And then everything slowed down a little bit, but PTC management started thinking, maybe we can do some more trackless conversions. There was in 1952, there were still about 430 near sides on the property. They're serving 15 different routes. Again, they were hit their 40 years of service. They were not getting any younger. There were some rehabs that were done at the time, amazingly, on a 40-year-old fleet. But they had to be kept going. Again, there were no replacements in sight, especially for the rail system. And, there was a thought that, maybe there would be more cars coming. Management wasn't looking at buying any new PCCs, but they did look at the Detroit PCC fleet, considered buying those, then didn't get those. They looked at Cincinnati, had a bunch of standard cars, Peter Wood cars that were newer than the 8000s. Again, passed that up. So again, there was a need for something to serve something. And the thought was, again, could we convert some of these lines to trackless, just like they did with 61, 29, 75, 59? And a list of 19 different routes were proposed. And this is a map of the routes. There's a list of the routes off on the side there that were considered. Again, this would have changed the trackless system dramatically, put more routes downtown. As you can see in the concentrated area there, a couple of routes in West Philadelphia. The 70 route was a particularly heavily used line. So again, fed the Market Frankfurt L, the 52nd Street. So there were a lot of different proposals here. There was always a proposal with 53 taking over 75. They actually ran through when 75 was a car line. So this would just build on that idea. And a couple to note here. One is I showed the 15 in blue. The 15 still operates today. Now it's the G1 as of this past weekend. That was the line that was rehabbed extensively in the early 2000s to come back to trolley service. So 15 was actually proposed as a trackless back then. The other was, if you can look at 81, kind of zigzagging through South Philly, 81 shared Snyder Avenue with 79. The thought was, again, extended over to 28th Street and out Passyunk. It used Passyunk for part of its line between the two gaps here. But again, that was an interesting thought. 79 obviously would become a route later on, a trackless route. But again, if this happened, again, we'd have a much different history to talk about with the trackless in Philadelphia. Obviously, it didn't, so we're stuck with what we've got. But this kind of came along. Again, numbers were put out. It didn't necessarily die really quickly. It was considered, but things changed in 1955 when National City Lines bought PTC, and a lot of this went by the wayside. But did get one success out of this. The 66 was a very heavily used line, and again, it was on that plan to add to the system that came about in 1952. Again, this went through a lot of heavily established neighborhoods in Northeast Philadelphia, fed the L at the Frankfurt Terminal, which was then called Bridge Pratt. Used double-end cars, again, the 5200 series almost from its beginning. Again, there was a combination of new development, track conditions, worn-out cars. The line actually had a loop at the terminal, but it came through sort of clockwise rather than counterclockwise, rather than clockwise, so left side doors were used. There was provisions up at the city line loop at the other end to put in a loop, and there was a thought that maybe if loops were provided, PCCs would use it, but the track conditions were such that was never considered. So the service began September 55. The line was a bus for about a month and a half before while it was being converted. And again, this was something that the city helped build, and the city purchased a fleet of 43 Marvin Harringtons for that service, and they were thrown into the mix at Frankfurt Depot. This would be the last Tracklesses purchased domestically in the United States until some of the new ones started to come out in the 70s, and most of those were originally from Canada. And then SEPTA didn't purchase a lot of those, again, the ones that were reconditioned by Toronto and a few other properties. Again, some shots of 66, with the 5200s on them. You can see the upper right as coming into Frankfurt Terminal. Again, use the left side doors to unload and load, and then loop around and go right back out to City Line. There's a shot there, 328 coming in. A shot that if you're familiar with this, you remember flashing lights, a bell that rang. It was always a noisy production when a 66 came in, and you knew it was coming in to the terminal. You'd hear that bell go off, and you can see how crowded the coach is that's coming in. And again, in the lower left is a gratuitous shot of a Mac bus in service while the conversion was happening. There's an upper Ren shot, 66 upper left, up at Frankfurt and Linden. The firehouse is still there. And a couple shots of the what was the Trackless yard. Again, that big yard and the right side replaced that yard that we saw a couple shots ago that had trolleys in it back then. Now it's all trackless. And you can see coach number 320 sitting there in the yard waiting for another assignment on 66. Again, National City Lines took over the system, pretty much decimated the streetcar system, which again was worn out, brought in 1,000 GM buses and converted most of those lines, and then kept what would exist through the 60s as the 13 lines that did get they're still using the PCCs and using the getting those capitalized and everything out. But there was when the 300s showed up again, there was a surplus of coaches, and 61 was still operating, but the small T40s on that were not getting any younger. And there was an ability to, because of some service reductions and ridership drops, again, there was an ability to move some of the surplus coaches over to the Ridge Depot from Frankfurt and Southern to populate 61 and help the system there. So, and again, please don't hold me. I'm pretty confident 240 to 249 moved out of Frankfurt. 233 to 39 is a guess from what I've been able to cobble together. But please don't hold me to those. It could have been more. So as you can see, some shots on 61. Again, lower left is at Wissahickon when it operated clockwise way back when, and the little substation and the driver's rest facility there. And lower right's one of the 100s coming up Ridge, right at the same place. Wissahickon loops right where the telephone booth is. So again, that's signed. It's got the southbound sign on a northbound trip, so I don't know if it's coming into the loop or what. But little different view today. There's an overpass here from Lincoln Drive, a very busy interchange going across the river to the expressway and the City Avenue area. And top right again is 61. right at 8th and Walnut again, the Manayunk sign, but ready to turn on the Walnut Street and start back northbound. There's a 47 PCC, a couple of cars back. Also in 1959, the 61 service on weekends started to be provided by buses out of Allegheny Depot. So again, those 1,000 GMs took over that service. Again, that probably was to just take a line crew off duty for the weekend more than anything else. Some shots on 61, the upper left and lower right are the container loop at the out on Venice Island. The upper right is also. And there's a shot in the lower left coming under the Reading Railroad overpass just north of Allegheny Avenue. And then came some reductions. And fortunately, again, the 100s were getting to be 20 years old. Little reliability issues there, wearing out. So 61 began again operating with buses on weekends and holidays in August of 59. 80 was temporarily converted to bus to facilitate roadway and sewer work on Oregon Avenue. And the slight rewrote was put into place with the bus operation. Took that little jog off of Shunk and 20th and 22nd Street, ironed that out a little bit. And 61 finally conked out, was replaced with buses in March of 61, and that closed Ridge Depot. And the 200s there were once again scattered at different places. I do want to note also, interestingly, all the post-war coaches, the three fleets, were 102 inches wide. And that seemed odd because Philadelphia's got a lot of narrow streets. Again, that was way before 102-inch diesel buses were purchased. That came with the 1,000 bus order in the 50s. But PTC and SEPTA still would purchase narrow buses up until the 90s for most of its operation. But again, the tracklesses for some reason were wider. And I think, again, that was part of, again, they were not subject to a lot of the motor vehicle restrictions, so you could get away with that before wider vehicles were allowed. So when 61 went out of service, now we're down to 4 trackless routes. Again, 80 and 61 are done, but 80 was temporary allegedly. So you had one route at Southern at 29 and the 3 at Frankfort. Not for long. Again, you can see in the upper right another gratuitous bus photo, but there is a Route 60 PCC in it. That's the 35th and Allegheny Loop. That was a cutback for 61. And again, you can see some of the, there's that 229 on 80. As I began to ride these as a teenager, I took them every day to school, and I started to put a roster together based on what I didn't see. And 229 apparently left the roster very early, along with 219. So I never got to ride those, but I was tracking that for some nerdy reason. And, then I started to cobble out a sort of a roster based on what I saw every day. But there was hope, as I mentioned, not all was lost. The 79 was viewed as a possible trackless route because, again, there were enough coaches around. When Ridge closed, just about everything that was at Ridge went to Southern. So Southern had pretty close to 50 coaches to operate one route. And, 79 is a fairly heavy cross-town line across Snyder Avenue in South Philly. One was a streetcar line. It was 2 routes that made the service, 79 and 81. 79 became a bus in October of 56. 81 became a bus just before that, and 81 actually cut back just to run between Broad and Snyder and Passyunk Avenue Bridge. Later on, the 37 would take that over once the 37 was converted from a streetcar. Major reroute on that. Again, there was that strong feeder to Broad Street Subway. The line read 5200 series cars, but as you can see in the shot up top, that's a 4000 Hog Island car. There were still some of those around till the early 50s that were available for this service. With the temporary conversion of Route 80 and the abandonment of 61, again, there was that surplus of coaches. And the thought was by PTC, well, let's use them. And 79 seemed to be a logical place to use them. It had only been abandoned for a few years, so just about all line poles were still there. There were some extensions needed on the east and west ends just to turn the coaches around. The shot at the bottom of the slide is 79 turning off 29th Street on Devere Avenue, a very odd angle turn, but that was added to turn the coaches on the west end. Again, being double-ended, it just stopped in the street at either end. So again, 29th Street, Delaware Avenue, the loops were added there. The line poles were able to be used. I remember when this was converted, the line poles were all painted a bright green. Before, line poles before that were always black. And for some reason, the line poles on 79 were all with a bright green. It was very noticeable. They were able to be reused. Again, the extensions were provided to provide turnback loops. And the trackless service actually began in June of 1961. And they again shared the fleet at Southern Depot. The pull-in wires were there. Again, the pull-in wires between Southern and 29 were there. So it was just a matter of putting a couple of switches in 22nd and 23rd Street to get to 79. So fairly easy conversion. And again, the top shot was again an 8,000 Peter Wood on 17 and the 5,200 on 79 at Southern Depot, just to give perspective. And another 5,200 in lower right on 79. I think that's 10th Street. I was trying to take a guess. 79 actually served the naval base at one time. There were some short turns that went there, and then the service actually went there for full time during World War II. There were double-ended two Hog Island cars. Double-ended cars were actually sort of coupled together. The Hog Islands could MU, and they ran two-car trains that ran between the Navy Yard and the Quartermaster Depot, and in the middle they crossed the Broad Street subway, so they could take loads of defense workers and get them efficiently between the subway and the two federal facilities. And the 79 kept that operation later on with single cars to the Navy Yard, and at the end it just ran to Swanson Street at the east end, and there were some peak hour trips that ran down the 20 line to get to the Navy Yard. Top right again is that shot turning off 29th Street onto Bear Avenue at the west end, and just a typical shot when Snyder, the tracks are still there. Bus coach headed eastbound, I think probably about 9th Street or so, just taking a guess, but somewhere east of Broad Street. And again, 79's there. Again, there's another shot coming up to the railroad underpass at 25th Street at the upper left. Lower right was, again, one of those things that this is an 11th and Snyder. I remember that appliance place very well. And again, any kind of service disruption, the cars, they just stopped. They couldn't get through. So a couple of 79s here, the line's tied up with fire department activity coming from there. A couple more shots of 79. Again, lower left is at the 29th Street Loop. Plays over on Snyder Avenue. Schuylkill Expressway, I-76 is just behind that. You can see the highway sign there, just off Fair Avenue. Upper right shots on Delaware Avenue, and those of you familiar with Philadelphia, Delaware Avenue was a railroad street, big wide street, and on the waterfront, you often saw box cars and other cars that were coming in and out of piers, stored out in the middle of the street. Not so great safety-wise, but now it's very much different. One track in the middle, separated, and a lot of traffic lanes. And you can see the 79 coaches just turned out at Delaware Street again on one of those really tight turns to turn, basically going north and turning back southeast to get back to Snyder Avenue. And I mentioned Publickers early on. Again, there's the Publicker facilities here behind the coach, Old Hickory, different brands of whiskeys. Behind the Mack tractor trailer is Spatola Wines. That's my godfather worked there for many years. So again, things that aren't there anymore for the most part, but the big defining part of the neighborhood employment center is the port off to the right again. Lots of people work there, and a lot of them took the 79 to work every day. And a couple other shots from a fan trip, but we'll talk about that as we go along here. Again, more of the 79. The layover point, again, at the 29th Street is right by this car lot here on Snyder Avenue. Again, 204 is at the same place, different perspective. And there's a broadside view of a coach at Southern Depot, one of the brills. Top right is a shot. This is 6th and Snyder. There's an eastbound 79 coming up on a 50 car that just turned off 7th Street. Shares the street, but not the wires. There were separate trolley and trackless wires here. On Wyoming Avenue, the same sort of situation existed, but on 8th Street, 9th Street, where 4761 operated, they share the wires. So there's no consistency there. I'm not sure quite why that was done, but again, this was just before PTC turned itself over to SEPTA. And again, PCC is still running on 50. A couple other developments under PCC, probably the last ones. Again, the 80 was formally abandoned as a trackless through the PUC process in 1962. So the temporary thing never came back. That stayed as a bus. A couple of years later, there were some operational changes that the PTC affected. One of them was to extend the 7 route, which ran down the west side of South Philadelphia over Oregon Avenue. So that picked up the 80, and that continues to this day. On 66, again, very popular route, and actually enhanced service there. A 3rd wire was added from the Bridge Pratt terminal up to Cottman Avenue. It stopped short just at Wellington Street, but that allowed the express operation in the peak direction. So you could have express trips made where, again, they made limited stops between Bridge Pratt and Cottman Avenue. They could be out on the 3rd wire and bypass local trips that were making, again, every stop or local stops in that area. That opened in September of 62. And that proved to be very popular. Again, that was a very interesting operation to watch, and so much so that later on under SEPTA, that was expanded to 4 wires. So you had a bypass wire in each direction, and for a little while there was some reverse peak express service operated. There's some limited express operation today, but not much. And again, in another minus, though, unfortunately, the 75 is cut back. Again, no longer going to Richmond Orthodox, but cutting back at the Arrett Street Terminal in April 66. I-95 was being constructed down in the Bridesburg area. That would require the line to be out. So I-95 crosses over the streets there. So the line would have to be shut down for that. So PTC decided, I suppose, just to end the route at the Frankfurt and Arrett, and the J bus, which formerly turned at Frankfurt and Arrett, was extended to pick that up on Margaret and Orthodox Street. The upper right picture is a 75 making the last run on the night it was changed over, and apparently it made a very strange last run. As I've been told, this cutback, there was a cutback just east of Torresdale Avenue on Edwin Street. The coach went down there, cut back, came back over Margaret and Orthodox, and then there was another cutback just west of Frankfurt at Leeper Street, made that cutback, came back, and then made a circuit, and that was the end of the route. I'm not sure what the reason for that was, or if that was a scheduled service, but the little placard on the front says last trackless, so you can't read it in this picture, unfortunately. But again, that took us down to 3 routes, 5 routes, excuse me, 3 at Frankfurt, 2 at Southern, and that's pretty much where things went with those last developments with PTC. And as you can see on the map, there was what was excised from 75, the dashed light, the dashed service up there on the upper box, and 80, the original line disappearing. 80 did have almost a 40-year career, so that was notable, I guess, back then. But that's where things went. So I was able to get some pictures, and again, this was before I was old enough to go out and take pictures, although I did ride the line quite a bit, but didn't have a camera, didn't have anything, didn't really think about pictures until later. But apparently there was some fan trip organized, and it may have covered all the lines, but I was sent these pictures a few years ago of the Coach 228 covering 2979 and the non-revenue wire between those lines and Southern Depot just before SEPTA took over. Apparently somebody asked to have 228 provide the service. 228 again was freshly painted in the PTC colors. The numbers are different. Instead of the Roman numbers, they went to sort of like a stick number at the time. So you can see the numbers are a little different, but again, it's that green and cream that we remember. Lower right picture is unusual. The 79 had a cutback that followed the 47 route, again, shared the wires here. But that went from Slider Avenue, 8th Street, over Wolf Street, back over 9th. So it kind of 2 blocks south and 2 blocks back. And Wolf Street was actually an odd street. The 47 turned west there, but it was an eastbound street. So for one block, it was a two-way street, but it wasn't any wider than any other part of Wolf Street. So the trolley would always buck traffic. And this turnback was rarely used. I kind of remember it once when there was a disruption on 79. There was a fire down toward the east end in that public area facilities. And the 79 was turned back here for service. But it was always a troublesome thing when, again, had to buck traffic, and making these turns was not easy. 29 had a similar turn back at 7th Street, which was, again, rarely used. And I remember that well because the wire switch from Morrison to 7th Street was a switch that you had to go through like almost at walking speed. It was just, I don't know what the issue was. But you could always tell when you had a rookie driver because they would just, they'd make the service stop at 7th and then hit the floor. These things flew. These were powerful. When you hit the accelerator, they went. And you knew the poles were going to dewire. You knew you were going off the wire because the operator went too fast. So they learned that by experience, I guess, over time. A couple more shots of that fan trip on 80. Up here again, that's the upper left is the diversion route, but technically the 80. So 228 still has the 80 signs and its curtain roll there. Put those up. Put up a blank sign there on the shadow over upper right. That's Snyder Avenue, just east of 2nd Street. Little meet in the lower left, again, at 7th Street. The 50 cars turning off of 7th to jog over to 5th. So I guess somebody decided this was a good shot, good place to get a photo shot of the two of them together. And another one here up at the western end of 79 up toward the 29th Street turnaround. A sign for 8th and Snyder again with the red slash because that's a cutback. Just a note on the photo on the upper right. PTC, when cars ran to the depot from the regular route, if they had to take a different route, they were assigned for the depot and actually were in service. So you could take a car, depending on where it was going, off route and take it to the depot or somewhere along the line that it took to get to the depot. And because the Trackless were part of the rail division, that was the same thing. You could take a 29 or 79 trip to 19th and Johnson, which was the Southern Depot, and that would be in service for that run. And then somewhere along the line, the operators just put up a blank sign with the red slash number, and still provided the same service. But if you didn't know any better, you didn't take it because you didn't see a sign. So, the operators, I knew better later on, and I would take these sometimes if I was going someplace that they were going. And the operators, they always knew, like, okay, this guy knows the secret. So that continued into the SEPTA year, at least for a few years. So again, to take us up to the end of the PTC era, September 30th, 1968, the Trackless system had 5 routes, 2 operating depots, a central shop at Cortland, and about 130 plus or minus coaches, 3 different fleets. And the map shows, again, Frankfurt up there, Cortland was just south of 75, Southern's way downtown South Philly. And that was always a problem, again, if any major work was needed to be done at Cortland, the coaches of Southern had to be towed up there, basically, or flatbedded up there. That became an issue. The coaches of Frankfurt could get into Cortland. There was a wire that you could get in off 75. It did require the coach to make a turn and then pull the wires because there was no connection for westbound. There was one from eastbound, which I couldn't ever understand because, again, most things would be coming in from the westbound. But it did require a supervisor to help come and pull the poles. And just to close things out again, there's the line truck sitting at 4th and Morris. Right, there's a playground right there to the right that I spent a lot of my youth at, not far from home. And the line truck guys are just taking a little break, I guess, from their duties. The track in 4th Street is the 50 car, and Morris Street is where the 29 crosses. And I guess they're just, again, waiting for their next assignment. And do remember that Mack line truck. There were a couple of them. Always interesting to see them come out. So that pretty much closes this up. Any questions or comments we can address now. One more slide I'll show. Again, if you have seen PTC maps, this was always a feature that you'd have one of each of the modes. This one's from 1950, so it looks like a Brill, but not really sure. There's some artistic license here. It could be a Marmon, but the windows are different. Again, the newest rapid transit cars were the 1938 South Broad Street extension cars here, PCC, and the newest Mac bus. So that's pretty much it. Any questions or anything? We'll be glad to
Thanks, Bob.
take a shot. Sure.
Actually, one of the comments was Philly is a transit fan's dream. And from Ray Stephens, he said, well, isn't it difficult isn't it having so many different types of vehicles with different gauges, power requirements, maintenance needs and skills, kind of expensive and sometimes difficult to keep them all running?
Yeah, it was. And as I mentioned, if you look at the PTC's rosters over the years, every line had a specific assignment. There were fleets that were actually assigned to different routes, and it was kind of odd that way. And again, for the Trackless, when you had 59 and 75 with their two different fleets, that's the way they operated until the new Marmons came along in 55. Yeah, if you saw a Marmon, that was a 59. If you saw a Brill, it was a 75. It was, but if you look at like bus rosters and everything, there were specific types of buses that went to specific routes. It was very regimented, and not quite sure why, but it seemed to work. So. But yeah, we had, again, even on the rapid transit side, people always ask, like, you had newer Market Frankfurt cars, why didn't they run them on the Broad Street subway? And again, the Market Frankfurt line's the trolley gauge and the Broad Street subway standard gauge, so you can't really mix unless you retruck or anything. And again, even if you did, the Market Frankfurt line is built to the New York IRT standards, the 8.5-foot wide cars, and the Broad Street's more like the BMT standards, 10-foot wide cars, much more generous as far as clearances and things like that. So,
sure.
So I see the one question where
yes,
line systems ever. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, let me tell people really quick what's coming up before we get to more questions. I'll let you read through them there for a second.
Okay.
And we'll definitely get to those because there were some really good ones. But really quick, I want to let everybody know our next Trolleyology will be David Warner, 1 month and counting. So if you saw his presentation probably about a year ago, maybe last May, this will kind of be young Dave's next trip to Pittsburgh with some really neat photos right before a particular abandonment. So stay tuned for that. That'll be March 25th, a month from today at 7 o'clock Eastern. And then we just announced Members Day will be April 5th. So if anybody's in town, if anybody's a member, that'll be hopefully we'll have something fun for you guys to see. I know we will. And then we also have our volunteer appreciation dinner that day. Okay, thank you so much, Bob. That was thorough and interesting, and lots of great photos and lots of great comments and questions coming in. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. So let me get a few of those up here. Let's see. One of the questions, which kind of was answered, was, did the earliest Trackless have trolley wheels instead of shoes and carbon inserts?
I believe they did, and I think they were changed pretty quickly. But yeah, in Philadelphia, the trolleys tended to have wheels for many years, and then I think it was even World War II is when they switched to shoes. But I think with the Trackless with the swivel, that the wheels didn't work so well. So again, the shoes were a little more effective. But I think that first fleet, again, those were trolleys with bus wheels on them basically. So they probably had the wheels as far as I know.
Yeah. Carl Jackson, I think, who had to leave, said that the trolleys in Seattle, Brills, and Pullman had wheels. And then let's see, another similar question. Did the early trackless trolleys have their pole bases near the front of the coach as opposed to later move to the center and ultimately nearer to the rear? That's from Bruce Horowitz.
Yeah, the first ones, again, you can see that the poles are way up front. The next two orders, they kind of move toward the center, and trackless operators will tell you it's not a bus. I live pretty close to the east end of the 29, and it was funny to watch. They made 90-degree turns to get from Mars to Tasker on Water Street, and they always had to ride outside of the wire. There was like you couldn't go inside, you de-wire, so it was like they took this very strange like S kind of turn where they would turn in, turn back out. and you always had to be outside of the wire radius for some reason. And again, I think it's just where the poles were mounted. But the early ones, again, with the poles up front, it wasn't that big a deal. But I think, again, as technology came along, they found out that you could do that, but you had to compensate by, staying outside of the wire radius.
Okay. Oh, and everybody, you can turn your videos on now if you like as well. And I'll let everyone unmute here in just a second. A comment from Angus says, I like that the trackless lines had car stops. They were not a bus.
Mm-hmm. And that's the until the, and this is true until today, up until this day and beyond. The rail division is what operates the trackless trolleys. There's still a rail division at Frankfurt that operates the 3 trackless lines, and I don't know why that is, other than I think it's related to PICs or anything. But the trackless always fell under the rail division. So, like I said, when those bright new poles came along on 79, when the other pole, the other ones that had black poles, they always had car stop, and they had stenciled on sort of like a cream color. On 79, it was a bright yellow when it had the car stop in green, but it was that stencil, but it was still a car. That, again, I'm looking at this, and I'm 6 years old. I'm thinking like it's not a car, but it is. So again, from the PTC and SEPTA standpoint, it's part of the rail division. It's just one of those things.
Do you know is there any kind of hierarchy, like when if you want to be a trackless operator or a streetcar operator, do you have to do bus first in SEPTA these days?
I think you have to qualify on every vehicle. Yeah, if you need to learn on the bus first. But interestingly, back then, and I grew up with a fellow whose dad drove the trackless. He did not have a driver's license, and again, you didn't have to. It wasn't a vehicle. And then later on, when he retired, he got a driver's license so he could drive the car, which is interesting because it must have been an interesting test. Like he just flew around the course, having driven for that many years. But you did. You could qualify for either, as far as I know, but again, license was not a requirement.
Okay. Angus, did you have something to say? I saw you're unmuted there.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bob. I visited Philly starting in 1971, rode the trackless, the 50. I even actually operated the 50 late at night unofficially. But I spent 41 years driving trackless in Vancouver and retired 15 years ago. So here's the kind of thing that I was driving. So I had Brill trolleys here, and we still have lots of trackless. So really enjoyable. Thanks so much. I really appreciated your presentation.
Yeah, and it's interesting you showed the model, Angus, because as an aside, PTC had ordered the 200 series back during the war, and it couldn't be completed because of war restrictions. But as those eased up, they finally came along. And if you look at the 200s, and there's some, I think Denver had some, Baltimore had a few, LA I think had some.
Yep.
They had changed the front so that there was a different windshield arrangement. You had the sloped windshield, but the rest of the body didn't change. And they were supposed to come out. The next generation of Brill cars looked like the one that you had, the one that CCF built with the different window arrangement all on the side. But because they were being thrown together quickly, it was all right. We'll redesign the front end. The rest of it still looks like the T40. It's got the squarish windows and everything. So I've been told that. I've also been told that's not true. I tend to believe it is true because if you look at orders that came out of Brill right after that, they were all that more modern style. And PTC actually had some C44s, ACF C44s, which looked exactly front end exactly the same and had the window treatment like the CCF coaches did. So it was, and they came along a couple of years after these Brills. So that design change was able to be instituted.
I always thought that those earlier Brill designs made them look much older. And they were relatively new. When I first rode them in Philly, I thought they were from the 30s or early 40s or something. And then I discovered they were much newer, again, because that front had looked so different.
Yeah, and they had that very sloped back, too, which was odd. I will tell you, they ran, I took those to high school for 3 years. They ran through anything. Snow, whatever. I mean, there'll be times when you could barely pick up power because of ice on the wires, but driver hit the accelerator, they just went, and they were tanks, and they were maintained very well up until about the mid 70s. PTC and SEPTA maintain those well, but they were, as I was told by people that maintained them, they were easy to maintain. They were very solidly built. The one thing that you would see toward the end was when the body started to break up a little bit. Put up a window and it would sort of tilt, or it wouldn't catch the side, so it would come slamming down. But apparently that was the only thing. The body started to work out of shape. You would see that with the windows, but they're very solidly built vehicles.
So do you know what length they were? Were they 36 feet long?
Yeah, I think just under 36. Yeah.
Okay, because the T44 Canadian car brills, they were 36 feet long, and then later the T48 model that came out, those were 40 feet long.
Yeah.
But I drove the old T44s for 6-7 years on regular runs on a certain line. They were like hot rods because they were lighter and shorter and easier to steer, but they had the same horsepower rated motor and acceleration rate. So you could actually drag race from a stoplight with cars and peel away faster than the bigger brills. So they were fun to drive. They were like little hot rods. So that was my preference. They also had a different type of braking system. The T44s had an earlier streetcar type brake, a very, very soft brake pedal. Like it would just float down to the floor, and then all the T48s and later had a regular type bus brake. So we had one of these running last summer in Vancouver here, 76 years old, and people see this coming down the street and they just stop and they can't believe what they're seeing. So thank you again.
Yeah, those I remember the brake and the accelerator pedals were huge.
Yeah.
It's like twice the size of a human foot, but and very funny angle, because the fellow that I knew, his dad drove him, said that you'd come home with backache because you had to sit at a funny angle and then your feet were up at pressing these 45-degree pedals. Or is it just? It was of course no power steering or anything, but interesting little coaches, and it was interesting also that the first group of Mormons was about 37 feet long, and the 300s were close to 40.
Yeah.
It's a little dispute whether they were actually T48s or T50s.
Right.
Again, I've seen both, but I know they were 48 passenger capacity. So
we used to say, as drivers, every so often that you'd finish your shift and you had brill knee, because your leg was so tired after 8 hours of working those pedals.
Yeah.
Edward has his hand up.
Yes, Kristen, I just want to thank you for organizing this, and Bob, thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Sure, thank you.
Great.
Right.
Lots of nice comments coming in. Thomas asks, did you talk about the 300 series?
Yeah, for the 300s, that was the last order.
Oh, okay.
For 66, yeah. But I saw Tom had a question too about why the Mormons weren't, that the 400s weren't numbered 266 and higher, and that's a good question, and I don't know if I have the right answer. I've heard two different stories on that. One is they were numbered at the tail end of a double-decker group for PTC, and they actually, a couple had to go before. I think the double-deckers were up to 475. PTC wanted to keep those separate because they didn't own them. So that was where they squeezed them in. If you look at the PTC bus roster in particular, the numbers are all over the place. They run series, right? There are some that jump out and, again, numbered around older ones, basically below the number 2000 where the PCC started. But I had heard that they were talking about 266, which would have taken it up, if there's 28 of them, I guess, into the 290s. And PTC usually did not try, if they ordered something, they usually tried to number them in a different series. A consecutive thing didn't seem to work for them. So again, two different answers to that. I don't know which one's accurate, but I do know there was a deliberate attempt to not have a series, to separate these out because they weren't owned by PTC. The 300 series there were buses numbered in that when the first Mormons came along, so that wasn't available. But again, as new buses came and other ones left, series of. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say Bruce has his hand up.
Mm-hmm.
First, I just have to say, what a wonderful presentation, Bob. I remember the 5 routes, but I don't remember before any of that, and it's just always been a fascination. And you've answered a few questions that I never knew. One that I'm curious, and it's a fascination, actual obsession fascination, is angle position versus power on versus power off. And now we've lost almost all of that with radio-based switching. But what can you tell us about Philadelphia's use? I'm from Boston, so I knew the Boston system well, but I've been on all of the North American systems, watched them disappear one by one, and most sadly, Boston just in the last year and a half.
Yeah, the trackless system, basically, you had a switch at Frankfurt and Arrett for 59 and 75, which was probably the one that got the most use. And then there was another one up at Penn and Arrett for 59 and 79, broke up, and they were electric switches. The other ones, there weren't.
By electric, meaning power on, power off, or how did they control them?
I don't really know. I've heard a couple different. I've heard that
But some would figure the angle if you were veering to the right. And I still remember the guy with the old coaches in Boston would pull the handbrake and then step on the pedal so he could power it, and that would be to turn right, power right.
Yeah, that was the electric switches. Just about all the other ones, from what I recall, was just sort of you were turning that direction, and that didn't always work. Like I know the ones at 23rd Street, you had to go through those very slowly, both 29 and 79, and you had to start making a turn, and a lot of times the poles didn't, so the operator would have to get out and put the poles back on the fire. But I think it was, like I said, the two that I mentioned up in Frankfurt, they were used very frequently. The other ones were not as frequent. But that troublesome one at 7th and Morris I mentioned on 29, that was an electric switch, but apparently never worked. And again, it worked. It was used so infrequently that, again, I think that's where they had all the trouble, that it kind of reset itself or whatever. I heard a couple operator stories about that.
Thank you.
The only other one I knew was up 33rd and Dickinson on the off-street loop. There was an electric switch, and you could bypass a coach. And I think that was the one operator that told me about that one was, again, you came in, you coasted under the switch, and then you hit the power at the right point, which was Toronto has that
Boston.
Great. But again, never really got an accurate story or consistent story on that. And it was, usually the operator just said, if I go this way, the poles go this way. And if they don't, I go out, reset them, kind of thing. So,
we had a question about the positive and negative wires. Well, do you know what the tradition was for those? Which was which?
I was always told the eastern wire was the positive and the west was the negative, but I've seen
the curb is negative. That one, because I actually have gone through a safety training program. At least in all the systems that shared like in Boston, if it was shared with a streetcar, the positive wire was the one further from the curb. So if you de-wire and you're standing in water, don't do anything. But if your feet are damp, you always put the ground up first. I've done this, of course, and it was on the curb side. You had to put it up first.
Yeah, I've heard that, but I've also seen pictures of where it's done the opposite way, where I've seen,
I'm sure there are. I was going to say, I'm not speaking for everywhere, but I know Boston, it was the safe way to do it.
Yeah, I think that 79 turnaround on 8th Street was actually the opposite. That was what I kind of recall, but I'm pretty sure it was the other. Like if the one to the left of the operator was the power, and the one to the curb side was the negative. Yeah.
Do you know on the one where they shared north-south, that would be with a 47 or 50? Yeah. There are a lot of pictures, people unknowingly, you can see the streetcar is going on the inner wire, and that answers the question.
Yeah. But if I've seen pictures of 47 on that cutback where it's on the other side.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Wow.
Some nice discussion tonight. Thanks, guys. Do we have any other questions or comments for Bob? Okay. Hearing none.
See what's in the chat here. I think we covered them all, didn't we?
I think. Yeah, some nice comments. Yeah.
The one George had the question about the sections were never connected, and part of the 52 plan was to do that you would finally get a connection between the systems, because again, anything on a Southern coach or even on a Ridge coach or Allegheny coach, if you had to go to Portland, you had to tow it, or you had to truck it. And with all the additions, you wouldn't have that issue anymore. But that never happened. But it was also interesting where you talk to people and they operated as if they were like 1,000 miles apart, the way that, you know, the systems ran. And I remember talking to a guy who was a line guy who said, like, we did things different on the Frankfurt end than we did on the southern end. It's like, you know, why was that? Again, it was a different crew. Who knows? But again, that was always a sore point, that if that could have been solved. And even in part two, we saw that, yeah, there was that opportunity in the 80s to change some rail lines to cars, just like what happened in the 50s. And 50 was always the first one that came up because 50 intersected everything. So if you got 50, you tied 29 and 79 to 75, and then 75 would take you over to Frankfurt. So and put you right in Portland. So that was always like, let's do 50, but it just never happened.
Okay. All righty. Well, I think we will go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Bob, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about the museum, go to patrolley.org, or if you'd like to become a member or volunteer, patrolley.org/support. We really appreciate you guys coming tonight, especially those of you who donated. Please join us again in about a month for our next presentation, this time Pittsburgh themed. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you.